Hey guys, today I'm gonna do my February wrap-up. So February overall left me with a really good feeling, but I did not read as much as I wanted to read because the first book that I read took me 2 weeks, and I'm gonna get into that. But I, in the end, felt really good about the month because the rest of the month was a lot better and I read some really amazing books, but the first half was a little bit disappointing. I just wanted to read more this month. But yeah, overall I am really happy with this month, so let's just get into it. So first this month I finished Heart of Iron by Ashley Poston. This is an arc that I got and it just came out. I also did a full-length review of it, so I'm gonna leave a link to that in the description and in the info card. This was the book that took me 2 weeks to read, and this book is definitely not bad by any means, but I just thought that nothing about it was just very engaging. I never really had any motivation to pick it up. I didn't really care about the storyline and how it would continue, how it would play out, and yeah, just everything about this was kind of mediocre and boring for me. I thought the world building was kind of, it just didn't intrigue me. I didn't want to find out more about it. I thought that the plot was very predictable, just in general, but also because it is a retelling of Anastasia, and I just thought that a lot of the elements were way too similar to the original tale, and there was just nothing where I was kind of like, oh, that's an interesting spin on it. I just didn't really have that, even though there are a couple of interesting things done with it. It just wasn't really what I felt about it. The villain was incredibly disappointing. I was super sad about that. Also, the villain was incredibly predictable. If you've seen Anastasia, it's like so predictable, which is fine if you make the villain predictable, but then don't make the story about finding out who the villain is and then name your villain a name that sounds a lot like Rasputin. I am still kind of confused about that. I definitely think the characters were interesting and they were definitely my favorite part about this novel, but even with them I kind of felt like I didn't have any investment. I was not emotionally invested at all with the story, and that was definitely my biggest issue because I really love being emotionally invested, and so that did not happen at all for me in the story. So I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars because, as I said, I don't think it's a bad book, but I just expected a lot more from it, and I'm really sad that I didn't like it more. Then I read All Out. This is an anthology edited by Sondra Mitchell, and I also already did a full review on this, so I'm gonna leave a link in the description and in the info card. I'm not gonna say this every time because it's happening a couple more times. But yeah, this is an anthology all about queer characters throughout history, so this is a historical fiction anthology and it is so fucking amazing. I thought it had a great variety when it comes to just different kinds of stories. I think all of the stories had something important to tell. There were a couple of stories that, you know, I didn't like as much as others that I only gave 2 stars, but even with these, for the most part, I felt like they could be something that other people would enjoy, they could be something that others would relate to. There was not a single story in there where I thought like it didn't make sense to have it in this anthology or anything. I thought every story was very valid, and I just thought this was such a well done anthology. I really loved it. My favorite story was definitely the one by Elliot Wake, and I do want to read more by him now. I also really loved the story by Anna Marie McLemore, and just in general there were a couple of authors in there that I had definitely heard about before and that I was excited to read something from, but that I had never read anything from before. So it's definitely a couple of authors that I want to check out more of their stuff now. And yeah, I think there were a couple of things that could have been like better. There definitely could have been a little bit more asexual and aromantic representation, and even a little bit more trans representation. And I also think that geographically it could have been set in more places than just, you know, the US and Europe. There was one story set in Mexico. Other than that, it wasn't really diverse when it comes to, you know, places. But that's just like very nitpicky. I thought overall it was great. And if you want to hear my thoughts on the individual stories, you can check out, you know, my full review or my Goodreads review. I also have individual ratings and reviews for the stories there. But yeah, I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. My average rating was not close to 5, but I love this so much and I love what it did, and I think there's gonna be a story in there for everyone. I think if you are a queer person, then there's probably gonna be one story in there that you're gonna relate to and that you are definitely gonna appreciate on a deep personal level. and that's absolutely what I love, and that's why I think this deserves 5 stars. Then I read This Tiny Perfect World by Lauren Gabaldi. This is also an ARC. I'm gonna leave the link to the review everywhere, and this was one that I was very excited about because I knew this had to do with a girl kind of outgrowing her hometown and just kind of realizing that she wants to achieve a little bit more than just staying there and, you know, taking over the cafe that has been kind of running in her family. And I did not know that this would also take place in a theater camp, and that the theater camp would be the kind of reason as to why this girl realized that she wanted more. So that's definitely an aspect that I really loved and really appreciated and was just not expecting. This took me a really long time to get into. I think there were a lot of problems in the beginning. I thought there were a couple of problematic characters, not as in offensive or like could be potentially triggering for people. It was just like a certain male entitlement that I just hate and I'm not interested in reading about anymore. Like, there's so much good fiction out there about amazing female characters and with amazing male characters that I'm just done reading about male characters that are just being annoying fucks. And so I had my problems with this book in the beginning and I was really disappointed. I was like, oh my god, I wanted to love this so much. But then it ended up kind of changing for me, and I thought a lot of the things that were done were kind of justified in a way. There's still gonna be things that you will probably have an issue with, but for me everything kind of played out in a way where I was fine with everything that I had read about before. I thought there were really great friendships in there. I thought there was an amazing kind of family dynamic in there. I thought that the main character had wonderful character development and that this kind of conflict between hometown and wanting to branch out was really, really well done. So in the end I gave it 4 out of 5 stars because I actually really, really appreciated what this novel did. It had a love triangle, but hear me out. The love triangle was the kind of love triangle that I love. It was a love triangle that did not represent a girl being torn between 2 boys, but the love triangle represented this struggle between hometown and everything that's familiar and the new exciting kind of stuff and the wanting to branch out. That's the kind of love triangle I love. The love triangle that focuses on a different aspect, that reflects on a different issue. Oh my god, and that aspect alone made me incredibly happy. This did a lot of things wrong in the beginning, but I also thought it did a lot of things very, very right. I would definitely recommend checking out my review so you can hear a little bit of the issues that I had with it and you can kind of find out if you think you're gonna be okay with it. But I think if you think you can kind of handle it and kind of get through the parts that are not so good, it's worth it. I actually thought it was really, really enjoyable and I did have emotional investment in it in the end. So yeah, I really liked it and gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read Ink Mistress by Audrey Corthurst, and I already had a hard time talking about this in my review, and I tried really, really hard not to cry in my review because I was like, girl, you have to consider that people who don't know you are gonna watch this review and you don't want them to just look up this book and see a girl crying about it. Ink Mistress was amazing. It was one of the best books I have ever read. I don't know how to talk about it because I loved every single thing about it. So I don't even know what to tell you because there's nothing I can point out that I didn't like. I loved the world building. I loved the overall plot. I loved the characters, like all of them. I loved the romance so fucking much. I didn't even really talk about that in my review. The romance hit me so hard and it felt so good and so healthy and so happy and so good. And oh, the villain was amazing. The writing was beautiful. I just loved every single thing about it, and when I finished it, I knew immediately that this would get 5 stars. I knew immediately that it would be on my top books of 2018, and I knew immediately that it would probably stay in my top 5, at least, if not top 3, throughout the whole year. I also kind of knew that this is probably one of my new favorite books of all time. And it's now been a week, a little bit over a week since I finished it, and it's actually one of my favorite books of all time. The only 2 books that made it to my favorites of all time last year were A Conjuring of Light and Ramona Blue. And if you've been here for a little while, you will know how much these books mean to me. So having Ink Mistress together with these books is a huge deal that I still kind of have to cope with and have to understand. I feel so strongly about this book. I could not do it. I really still don't know how to describe it. It's really just this very, very intense feeling and this deep connection almost that I have with this book, and I just felt so many things while reading it. The emotional investment was huge. So if it does all of these things, and I think it did all of them perfectly, but then it also is able to have me emotionally invested basically from the first page on, that's like perfect, and that's guaranteed for a 5 stars and almost guaranteed for a favorite. And like, I looked up quotes to put in my Goodreads review, and when I looked at the highlighted quotes in my book and I read them, I just started crying because I was like, it's just so beautiful. So yeah, I can gush about this so much more. Like, I could just do a whole video just kind of crying about it and saying how beautiful it is. I'm so in love, and it was so unexpected. I think that is what is blowing me away so much. The last couple of favorite books that were added to my overall favorites, they were all books that I was like super anticipating, that were by authors that I really loved, and they had been books that I had been looking forward to for a really long time. And Ink Mistress was something that I was excited for, but 2 weeks ago, if you would have asked me, I would have said this is like on the lower range of my arcs that I have. I would have said like, this is one that I'm happy I got approved for, but it's more something that I kind of feel neutral about, and I'm not really sure if I'm really gonna like it. And it just completely blew me away, and I think that's definitely one of the reasons why I really appreciate it, because for the first time in a long time, it's one of these books that completely took me by surprise. So yeah, I want to say more, but at the same time I know I shouldn't say more, but I just loved it. I loved it so much, and I'd highly recommend it to everyone. 5 out of 5 stars for Ink Mistress. I love this book so fucking much. And finally this month I finished 3 Dark Crowns by Kendra Blake. I'm so happy because this was on my TBR. I mean, a lot of these books were on my TBR, but this was kind of not one that a certain deadline was connected to. I thought the beginning of this was so lame. I think this is so hard to get into. I think the writing is incredibly distant. I, up until 100 pages, was kind of thinking, I want to DNF this. I knew that people had issues getting into this, so I wanted to give it a little bit more time, but definitely, even when I hit 100 pages, I was still like, this is gonna be a DNF for me. But I decided to push through because, as I said, I knew people were kind of having a hard time, and I'm definitely glad I pushed through. Like 100%, I think that this developed in a really good way, but I still have a lot of issues with it. I still think that the writing feels very distant. I don't really feel as much while reading it, which is obviously an issue, and I just don't really have that with this writing style. I also think there's so many characters, and even at the end I had a hard time understanding who is who and who belongs to which queen and all of these kinds of things. I thought it was incredibly hard to keep track of them. I also thought it's incredibly confusing that there's just so many characters this focuses on. So not only are there just a lot of characters in general, but also it's not like the 3 queens are the main characters. It's really this huge ensemble. A lot of the kind of side characters have way more storyline than the queens have. I thought in the beginning that was also very confusing. So you really always have to concentrate and think, oh, so this is a paragraph by this person, this is a paragraph about this person, blah blah blah. There were so many things kind of coming together that made this kind of not even hard to read, but just kind of a little bit of a pain in the ass and a little bit of a mess. As I said, I was definitely happy I decided to finish it. I thought that the end was very intriguing. I definitely thought that a lot of it was actually really quick to read, which I did not expect when I first started it. And I definitely think that there's a bunch of really interesting, intriguing characters in there. It was just a little bit too all over the place in a lot of parts. I ended up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars because I did really like the ending, and I do want to continue with the series, but I was definitely expecting a lot more and I wanted a lot more from this, and I just really hope that the series kind of gets better for me. Anyway, this is everything that I read in February. Obviously, I want to hear your thoughts on any of these books if you've read them, or otherwise what your favorite book of February was. And thank you so much for watching. I guess I'll see you soon. Bye!